So today we're going to get into the incredibly complex history that's really at the heart of the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. You see, this isn't just a battle of armies, it's a battle of stories, and we're going to break down exactly why that is.
Okay, so take a look at this quote. When Russia launched its full-scale invasion back in 2022, this was the justification we heard. President Putin wasn't just framing it as a geopolitical move. No, he was talking about a historical betrayal. He was basically saying that promises made way back at the end of the Cold War had been totally broken.
Which leads us to the big question, right? What is the history they're actually fighting over? Because let's be clear, Putin's quote, that's not just about NATO expansion in the 90s. We're talking about a battle that goes back centuries. It's about shared triumphs, but also some really, really deep traumas. So let's dive in and see what that history really looks like. All right, so to really get a grip on the present, we've got to rewind the clock. We're heading back to the 20th century, when both Russia and Ukraine were bound together as part of the Soviet Union. And this era, well, it was a time of huge progress, but also just unimaginable pain. Okay, so picture this. It's the 1930s, and the official Soviet story is all about progress, all about modernization. Ukraine, which was famous for being the breadbasket of the USSR, was suddenly being turned into this industrial giant. You had these huge projects, like this massive hydropower plant, being shown off as proof of how amazing the Soviet system was. It was the ultimate symbol of taking a farming society and making it modern. But, and this is where the story takes a really tragic turn, that shiny narrative of progress was hiding something much, much darker. This report from the UK House of Commons gets right to it. This progress came at a terrible, terrible cost. While those new factories were going up, out in the countryside, people were being deliberately and systematically starved. And the cost was just staggering. 7 million people. That's how many Ukrainians, mostly peasant farmers, died of starvation in just 2 years. This was the Holodomor, which literally means death by hunger. And let's be crystal clear, this was not a natural disaster. This was man-made. To crush any resistance to his farm collectivization plans and meet insane grain quotas, Stalin's authorities just went in and took all the food. Everything. And the result was mass death. So you can really start to see how modern Ukrainian identity was forged in these two massive traumas. First, you have the Holodomor, which became this permanent, painful memory of Moscow's brutality. Then, fast forward a few decades to 1986, the Chernobyl disaster happens, and it's another catastrophe that's blamed squarely on the secrecy and the epic failures of the Soviet system. That event, right there, poured fuel on the fire of the independence movement that would eventually, finally, break Ukraine free. So all this historical pressure is just building and building until, bang, the Soviet Union collapses. And for a moment, it was a time of incredible hope, of immense promise. Ukraine was finally stepping onto the world stage as its own truly independent nation. And this right here, the Belovezha Accords, this is the document that sealed the deal. The leaders of Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus all got together and basically said, the Soviet Union, yeah, it ceases to exist. For Ukraine, you have to understand this wasn't just the end of some empire, this was the birth of their modern independence. And over the next few years, this new reality was cemented by the international community. I mean, just look at this list. Russia itself formally recognized Ukraine's sovereignty again and again and again. Let's zero in on the 1994 Budapest Memorandum. Russia literally promised to respect Ukraine's borders. And what did Ukraine do in return? They gave up their entire nuclear arsenal, the third largest in the world at the time. Then you got the NATO-Russia Founding Act, which says every state has the right to choose its own security alliances. These weren't just handshakes, you know? These were formal, on-the-record commitments. But that fresh start, well, it got complicated. And it got complicated fast. As Ukraine started to figure out its future, the whole nation found itself getting pulled in two completely different directions, and that created some really deep divisions from within. And this is really the key split that defined the next 20 years. The country was basically divided. You had Western Ukraine, which was looking more and more towards Europe and the EU, and then you had Eastern Ukraine, which kept its strong cultural and political ties to Russia. And this wasn't just, a simple disagreement. It became the central fight in all of Ukrainian politics. Yeah, and this tension definitely didn't stay quiet. It just kept erupting. You can see the constant back and forth right here on this timeline. In 2004, you get the Orange Revolution, which throws out a rigged pro-Russian election result. But then the pendulum swings back the other way. The real absolute breaking point, though, was 2013. The pro-Russian president, Yanukovych, walks away from a huge trade deal with the EU. That decision sparked the massive Euromaidan protests. He was eventually kicked out, and that's what led directly to Russia's annexation of Crimea in 2014.
Okay, so to really truly understand where Russia's historical claims are coming from, we have to go way, way back. I'm talking all the way back to the 17th century, to a single agreement that, believe it or not, both sides see as a crucial part of their origin story. So, back in 1654, you have the leader of the Cossacks, who were these fiercely independent, kind of warrior-like people living in what is now Ukraine. They signed this agreement with the Russian Tsar. Now, at the time, they were desperate for an ally because they were fighting for their freedom from the super powerful Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. But the big question, the one that's been debated for centuries, is what did this agreement actually mean? And that is the absolute core of this whole historical dispute. And this is where you see two totally different versions of the exact same event. On the Ukrainian side, they saw it as a temporary military alliance, a practical deal to get some protection and keep their autonomy from Poland. Simple as that. But on the Russian and later the Soviet side, oh no, they called it a reunification. They saw it as the moment that the Ukrainian people, who they often condescendingly called Little Russians, submitted to the Tsar and came back home to the Russian world.
And believe me, this historical interpretation had huge modern consequences. Fast forward to 1954. To celebrate the 300th anniversary of this so-called reunification, the Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev does something massive. He transfers control of the entire Crimean Peninsula from the Russian Soviet Republic to the Ukrainian Soviet Republic. It was meant to be a symbolic gift, totally based on that one historical narrative, but it was a decision that redrew the map in a way that would have explosive results down the line. Which brings us all the way back to today. And you can see how all these different threads, the trauma under the Soviets, the promises that were made after, and these disagreements that are literally centuries old, they're not just in the past. They are active battlefronts in the current war. And as analyses like this one from the Journal of Strategic Security show, this war isn't just being fought with tanks and missiles. It's being fought with stories, with historical narratives. Both sides are locked in this fierce battle over the past, each one trying to convince the world and their own citizens that their version of history is the right one.
And this is exactly where history becomes a weapon. Russia uses its story of reunification to argue that Ukraine isn't even a real separate country. Meanwhile, Ukraine pulls on the painful memory of the Holodomor and its long struggle for independence to rally its people against what they see as a historical oppressor. So you see, history isn't just some boring background context here, it's the active justification for the war itself.
So all of this leaves us with a really tough final question. The war in Ukraine, sure, it's a fight for territory, it's a fight for the future, but it's also a deep, profound argument about the past. And when the very story of who you are as a people is at the center of the conflict, well, how in the world do you even begin to write a lasting peace?